and it skips 5. So I don't know. Maybe that's just to keep you
And it
interested.
got 5 that time.
Oh, did it? I didn't see it.
Yeah. You must
All
blink.
right, you guys, what's up? Welcome back to the Unlock Your Freedom podcast. Today, got a cool chat with Jason Cercone. Jason, what's up, brother? How are you?
What's going on, Kevin? Glad to be here with you today.
Yeah, man, it's all good. Glad you're here. It's going to be a lot of fun. So, man, kick us off. Tell everybody just a little bit about you.
Absolutely. I'd love to. So my name is Jason Cercone, as Kevin said. I work in the podcast space, helping people launch podcasts and make sure that they're in the right mindset. That's really where I put my focus, is trying to help with the fundamentals, but having the right mindset for what podcasting can bring to your world and help in regards to development of your brand. So whether you're looking to start your own show or be a value-driven guest that goes on other podcasts and talks to audiences about what you're knowledgeable about and makes an impact that would hopefully make someone want to come check you out and see what else you can do to help them. That's really where I focus my time and attention, and helping entrepreneurs and professionals really excel and get the most from this platform. And I've been podcasting myself since 2015. I host a show called Evolution of Brand, and also have a show called Pod Theory, which I'm not actively producing content for, but will probably be doing a rebrand and reintroducing that show to the world sometime down the road. I don't want to put a date on that because who knows how things will unfold there. But
Right.
yeah, fully entrenched in the podcast game and loving every minute of it.
Yeah, and I could personally attest to the phenomenal guest that Jason hosts. Shameless plug, I was actually a guest of his, but he does have some really good guests. I've listened to a bunch of his podcasts, and he's a great host, and he has really great questions. And so I think a lot of value to be found. So definitely check out his show. So to that theme, why do you suggest entrepreneurs and professionals in any niche really utilize that podcast platform to build the brand?
Well, there's a number of reasons why podcasting is such a great world to be a part of, but to keep it short and simple, I will stress the most important aspect, which sometimes gets overlooked, and I think many people really don't give this enough respect. It's the value of networking that you get from podcasting. Whether you're hosting your own show or you're being a guest, this goes both ways. The opportunities that open up when you root yourself in value and speak to others that are passionate about the subjects that you're passionate about. You can create so many opportunities for yourself if you have that mutual respect for the person on the other end of the mic, and you don't treat podcasting like a transaction. When you show up to podcasts, you bring value, you bring your expertise, you tell good stories, you offer a compelling personality to the audience, somebody or something that somebody would want to gravitate towards. And when you do that, you have a number of opportunities to get new business. You have a number of opportunities to meet new people, and the conversations that take place before the mics go on and after the mics go on are invaluable to your brand building initiatives, because when the mics go off, after you've hit a home run and supplied all this value, the host may know somebody that they can connect you to that needs exactly what you offer. They may know a number of people. If the guest comes on and says, I know 3 or 4 people that would be excellent for your podcast, I'm going to get you introduced. So now, as the podcaster, you've got more guests that you can talk to, so you can continue building content and taking your show to new levels. So if you look at this from the networking perspective, and I know many people get hung up on download numbers and growth and having to get as big as possible, which in reality is an arbitrary number. And I'm sure we'll discuss this at some point. But if you look at it from that networking perspective and start treating it with the respect that it deserves, and talk to people on that level to where you're giving them value, you're taking value in return, and you're ultimately building a relationship that could be lucrative, that makes podcasting one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful platform on the internet today.
Yeah, well said. And so, kind of at your comment about guesting on other people's podcast, where do you feel like people really drop the ball with that as guest?
Well, it starts with the outreach process, and many people are just throwing their name at podcasts that maybe look like they have a huge audience or just happen to come up in a random search that they do. And they're not taking time to discover if the show even makes sense for them and their brand. In this space, you really have to think about quality over quantity. If you're trying to get on every possible show that will have you, the only thing that you're going to get from that is practice. And that's a good thing. Don't get me wrong. Practicing is great for finding the best ways to tell your brand story, for getting comfortable on the microphone. But it's better to do that in a space where you're speaking to an audience that would be your target customer. So if you work in the marketing space, for example, and you go on a bass fishing podcast, it's going to be hard for your message to be received and then responded to, because people that listen to that podcast are listening for bass tipping advice or bass fishing advice, or whatever you listen to a bass fishing podcast for. I've never listened to one, so it's a very random example, but you see my point. If you're not speaking to an audience that is in your arena, then it's very hard to see any results from your efforts. So many people will just spray and pray and throw their name at hundreds of podcasts hoping they get a response or two. And it's really not an effective approach. And then beyond that, people don't, I mean, like I say, as a podcaster, and Kevin, you can attest this as a podcaster too, you more than likely get a lot of requests to be on your podcast every week. And as a podcaster, at least one that's treating their show with a lot of TLC and knows what they're trying to communicate to the audience, you really need to know what that guest is going to bring to the show to provide value, so you can have a good conversation. You build a format based on their expertise so it caters to them and they can have that great conversation with you. But if they're not going to bring anything of significant value, then it's hard to make a decision on whether they make sense for your show. And a lot of people will just reach out and say, I'm a 7-figure earner and I have 6-time award winner of this, and I have celebrities come to my house 2 or 3 times a week and we have dinner. Like, things like that are great. If you've accomplished that in your world, that's phenomenal. But that doesn't tell me what we're going to talk about that's going to make impactful content for my audience. So you have to be leading with value when you reach out to podcasts. And if you just try to lean on everything you've accomplished or take that spray and pray approach, you're really not going to see any results that will give you a tangible difference in your brand building. So you have to think on a level of, what kind of value can I bring to this podcast? And is my value going to be received? And you can learn that by doing some simple research and looking at the show's content and looking at their audience, who they're speaking to. You can get this from social media. You can get this from their actual website and podcast descriptions. And when you find that information, use it to your advantage to reach out the right way.
Yeah, I mean, that's just intelligent in so many different ways. For one, it's respectful. It's respectful of, the podcast or host that you're reaching out to, their time, because you have to take the time to read, your inquiry and respond and all that, and respectful of your own time, because like Jason said, you don't really want to be on a bass fishing program talking about, marketing, because that's just not really relevant. And I don't know what they talk about on bass fishing podcast either, but it's probably
you have to look one up and see.
Yeah. It's probably about catching fish, I would imagine.
I would assume there's something about catching a fish in there,
but I'm pretty sure it's not about marketing either way.
I doubt it.
So that's that's really good advice. And like you said, man, I get tons of pitches, and I'm really grateful that people want to be on the podcast. But obviously we can't interview everybody, and you can tell sometimes it's just copy and paste, and sometimes the wrong names even been copied in. It's like, hey, Ramon, I love your podcast. I'm like, cool, man, I'm good for Ramon. And like, I get it, man.
Yeah.
People are trying to grow their brand, and I don't like hate on people for that, but like you said, man, you're gonna end up in the wrong place doing the wrong stuff, and you're gonna end up like diluting all your power because you're gonna be exhausted and overworked just trying to be good at everything. And if you're like trying to be good at everything, that's like average behavior, and because you're pandering to the middle. And if you want to be above average, you got to treat yourself above average. And so let's talk about the other side of that. For like a podcast host, what would you say is some of the fastest ways to really improve a podcast?
The fastest way that you can improve, no matter where you're at, if you're at the beginning of the journey or if you're seasoned and you have many episodes out there, again, as I mentioned, people get fixated on downloads and they're obsessed with growth and they want to get big for getting big's sake. And the fundamental approach that's going to make any podcast better and let all that other stuff fall into place naturally is to ask better questions. So many podcasters will ask surface level questions, the very basics, just to ask the question and let the host go into detail. I'm sorry, let the guest go into detail based off that question. But what they're failing to realize is that guest has probably answered the same question 100 times in a number of different platforms, not just on podcasts, but on any other interview settings that they've been a part of. You've got them for half an hour, 45 minutes, 1 hour, whatever the window is. This is your time to shine. And if you want to make your podcast better, start asking the questions that go 1, 2, 3 layers beneath the surface and really dig and try to get some stories out of that guest. So I always use the example of an author. Authors go on podcasts all the time to promote their new book or to promote any book they have. And they're not there just to promote, they're there to share their expertise. And in doing that, it promotes the book because as you listen to them talk and you learn about that expertise, if it's in their book and you really dig that, you want to learn more, you go find their book. So more than likely, the podcast host is going to say, tell us about writing your book. And they've asked that question so many times. And it's so basic that pretty much every author is going to have a pretty standard response to that, right? Like there'll be some differences baked in, but for the most part, it's just a very standard question. But if you take it another level deeper and say something to the effect of, when you were writing your book and you were putting everything together, were you ever at a point where you were just so unhappy with how things were coming together that you just wanted to press the delete button and erase the whole thing and start over? That question's a little bit
Yes.
deeper, and more than likely that frustration has been felt. And I know this because I've asked questions like that or something similar of any author I've had on my podcast. It's all felt the same because it's a tough process to write a book. There's work involved, and there are ways to simplify, but at the same time, it can be frustrating on that creative level to where what they're going to say is, oh my God, yes, let me tell you a story. And that's what podcasting is all about. If you can get good stories out of your guest, you did your job as a host. My favorite thing to hear when I'm hosting my show is when a guest says, no one's ever asked me that before. Because I know as soon as they say that in my head, the bells go off. I know that I've got something good that's about to unfold because they're going to tell a story they've never got to tell before. And they're going to be happy to tell it. So thinking on that level when you're making your questions and you're building your show format, instead of just the surface level, what can you do to ask something that's a little deeper, to probe a little bit? And then on the guest side, if you're providing questions to that podcaster so they can build that format, make those questions compelling as well. Don't just give surface level questions, give them something that's a little deeper. Obviously, you want it to cater to your expertise, but if it's a little bit deeper, it's just going to make the conversation more engaging. And when you share that podcast with your audience and when the host shares it with theirs, everybody wins because there's great content to be consumed. And it's not just that same old answer that you've supplied 100 times on a bunch of other podcasts and maybe on some video interviews. So that's the biggest thing for me that I tell everybody in regards to improving. If you're at the beginning, think deeper. If you're seasoned, start thinking about how you can ask those deeper questions.
Yeah, I think that's pretty profound advice. Just like, man, be curious, man. Curious is what, allows us as humans to evolve, our curiosity, the ability to ask questions, and just that sense of wonder and awe, man. It's really fun. And you have to be present to do that, obviously. But, I think that's pretty phenomenal when you get asked a question you actually have to think about, because if it's already on, repeat, there's no energy in that. There's nothing that's really happening. It's just kind of regurgitating and recycling the past. I was reading an article about George Lucas when he made Jaws, and he called Steven Spielberg because, they're buddies. And he's like, I think this movie's terrible. Like, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to finish it. And I'm sorry, that was Spielberg, whichever one made Jaws. And
I think it was Spielberg, right?
yeah, and he
Yeah.
called George Lucas and said that. And then there's like a story about George Lucas kind of doing that when he made Star Wars with Steven Spielberg. He's like, man, this doesn't even make any sense. Like nobody's gonna understand this movie. And I think Star Wars is gonna do okay. I think Jaws too. I think they're gonna make it.
Well, when you said that, I didn't want to interrupt as you were saying it, but I was gonna say, wait a minute, George Lucas did Jaws?
Yeah,
That's
man.
new.
Yeah, whichever, man. The guy with the beard, you know, and the glasses that's really successful and won all the Oscars, man. That could be either one, right? They're pretty
good point.
Pretty easy to mix up, at least on this end, I suppose. But we're not here to talk about that. It's not a film podcast or a bass fishing podcast.
Fishing, yep.
But yeah, I do want to know, you know, when you're building your business, was there anything like kind of that moment for you where you're just like, man, what's the point? You know, and like, does anybody care?
Oh yeah, I think that we've all experienced that feeling of imposter syndrome at some point in our professional pursuits. And for me, it was, I'll tell you, I started, I mean, my entrepreneurial path or story goes back to when I was 13 years old. I started flipping baseball cards. That's really where it all started for me. And that was where the bug bit me. And I didn't even really think about it back then. I was just thinking this is a neat opportunity that I'm going to get to make some money, which I then just turned around and blew on more baseball cards and football cards because I was 13 and didn't know what was really happening. But I look back on that experience and that was really like, I think I was like, well, yeah, I guess I did have this little business that was pretty awesome. So over time, I tried a bunch of different things. And when podcasting was a thing, I was also working in the beer industry. And I had unexpectedly lost my last corporate job. And that threw me for a loop because a month before that, I had interviewed for a regional management position. I remember coming home going, how does one go from interviewing for regional management position and being told that you did really well? We're going to go a different direction now, but we want to give you more responsibilities because we see you as someone we're going to turn to in the future, to being unemployed in a month. I was so thrown by that. And that did make me question a lot of things because I just couldn't wrap my arms around how something like that could happen. But at the same time, I was doing a side hustle and I decided it was time to go all in. I wanted to go that path and pursue what I was doing in the beer world. I was doing craft beer advocacy at the time. I'd started a blog and my friend and I launched our first podcast in that space as well. And I was operating very well throughout that. And this business had some pivots and some evolution of its own throughout the years. And coming into 2020, I had just turned 40. And at that point, I was working with several businesses and helping them get their products placed throughout the Pittsburgh market where I'm located. And really things were looking great. But every year after my birthday, which is right at the end of the year, December 29th, I always evaluate how did the last year go and what's coming up? Like, what are we doing going forward here? And coming into 2020, like I said, just turned 40 and I was looking at everything saying, is this something that I'm going to be able to be doing for another 20 years? And when I looked at everything, in my head, I kept going, no, it's not. Like, this isn't it. At that same time, I had started doing podcast production for a couple people. So that arm of my business, in addition to doing my own podcasting, was taking off. And I knew I was loving that. And I knew that was where I needed to be. What I was like, how do I get to that full time? So then the first quarter of 2020 was the best quarter I've ever had in my business, profit wise. And we all know what happened March 2020. I was like, of course, I felt like George Costanza. There's no way God will ever let me be successful. I'm like, we finally got things in the right place, and then COVID hits. So I was looking at everything from there and saying, what can I do now? And that was when that imposter syndrome snuck in. I've been working in the beer industry for all these years. Well, how am I going to transition all of that into what I'm doing? So I had to make that pivot because the universe forced my hand. The breweries were closing. The bars were closed. We didn't have as many places to put the product. So I came up with some creative ways to continue working with those brands while I made this transition in my business. And when it came down to it, I just said, you know what? You've got to get beyond this thought that some people might not like what you have to say, or that you don't have enough value to bring to the world. And what I told myself, and what I continue to tell myself every day, is your spin on this is unique. If you think that people aren't going to receive what you have to throw at them, you're probably right. So you have to stop thinking that way and put yourself in the mindset of abundance and say that what I have is valuable. What I have, the way that I tell it and the way that I offer it is unique. And the right people are going to resonate with this. And that mindset has helped me overcome a lot of those challenges. But I think overall, we all as entrepreneurs experience some sort of overwhelm, some sort of imposter syndrome. Is this really something I can run with? But if you come from that abundance mindset and you focus on what you can bring to the table and how you can make that impact, you'll overcome all of that stuff. And that was, like I said, when I made that transition, it was a little difficult at first. But what I've learned as I've built my business over the years is when something new comes along, there's enough resources out there that can teach you how to do it well. So when you come to that bridge, you find some resources and you learn a new skill. And that just makes you better all around with everything you do.
Yeah, well said. So, 2 years later and counting, what are some of the, big kind of challenges that have popped up now that you've, evolved to, the next level and beyond in your business?
Well, some of the challenges that I face today, I think it's still that overcoming the objection that people think they know everything when it comes to podcast guesting. I mean, that's probably the big part. I've talked to some people on the production end that know coming in, I don't know how to do this and I don't want to do this. I'd rather have someone that is professional to either teach me how, but even more so, I'd rather just have someone do it for me so I can keep my focus on just hosting. And then I don't have to try to learn all this back end production work. And for me, I said, great. Personally, I love that work. I do like to edit podcasts. That's just one of those things. I don't do them all myself. I do have someone that I work with that I'll hand the work over to. But personally, I don't mind doing that. But there's still that challenge of, well, why would I spend all this money to learn how to be a valuable podcast guest? I'm just going to go on shows and talk. Like, okay, fine. Go on shows and talk and get back to me in a few months and let me know what happens. Because just showing up on podcasts and talking is not going to solve the puzzle. It's just not. If you think that you can just go on a podcast and spin some verbiage about what you do and walk away and do nothing else and then expect the world to show up at your feet when that podcast goes live, you're dead wrong. And so many people have said, I've heard this back when Clubhouse was more popular, when we were in rooms there, in conversations that I've had in various platforms, people say, oh, I did podcast guesting and tried it. It just didn't work for me. And I always say, well, what did you do with those interviews? Well, what do you mean? What did I do with those interviews? Like, well, once it went live, did you do anything to market it on your end? Did you share it with your audience? Well, why would I do that? And that's the hole in the problem, or right there is that's a piece of content that you played a very significant role in creating because your expertise was center stage. All you had to do was show up with value, tell a good story, provide some great insight, entertain, give the audience something that they can really sink their teeth into. That podcast host and those producers are going to do everything else in regards to putting that show together, editing it, making you sound like $1 million if you didn't already in your initial raw recording. And then they're going to put assets together that market it to the world. This piece of content is going to serve as something that will show people that you know what you're talking about. You're an expert in your space. Why would you not share that? Why would you not put that in front of your audience and say, I was just a guest on Unlock Your Freedom? Kevin and I had a phenomenal conversation, and I talked about X, Y, and Z. You need to take a listen to this. So people in your audience, they want continued social proof to know that you are an expert and they are working and aligned with the right person or the right brand. So many, many times I've seen people go on podcasts. I've experienced this myself. You think everybody's, oh, this was so great. Make sure when it's live, share everything with me so I can share it with my audience. And you don't hear a sound when you do that. They never respond to anything. I don't get it. The behavior boggles my mind. And my mission, and if I have to do it one person at a time, so be it, is to make people stop doing that. Start taking more stock in the interviews that you're doing. Get more from the experience by building that relationship. Because I can tell you, and you can probably attest to this too, Kevin, if you have someone on your show and they do nothing, you never hear from them again after the interview, versus someone that you end up having a relationship with, you converse after the fact. Maybe you have someone that can come on their show, vice versa, whatever the case may be. You start building this relationship where it's more than just a podcast interview. Then when the show goes live, they share it. They're proud of it. They tell everybody about it. When it comes time for you to look for a second guest or to bring a guest back for a second time, which one are you going to lean towards? You're going to lean towards the person that was excited, that proved that they were happy to be part of your show and part of your content. The person that ignored you, it's going to be tough to get behind them again because they're probably just going to have the same behavior. It's crazy to me. And this is something that I'm trying to help people overcome. And if I can use this podcast platform as a stage to say, listen, this is going to make the world so much better for you because you took time to do this interview. Make something of it. I'm not saying you have to repurpose every piece of content, although some people do. I've had people come on my show and say, give me the raw video so I can clip it up and make clips for social content. I'm like, absolutely, here you go. But if you're just ignoring it and walking away, you're not doing it right. So that's one of the bigger challenges, is just making people overcome this mindset of, I go on a podcast, I talk, that's where it ends. You've got to do much more than that.
So whenever, as a business owner, you're working to grow your business, obviously that's a mistake people are making by not putting their stuff out there. What do you feel like, one of the kind of continual, drains or doubts that keeps popping up for you over and over again as an entrepreneur is that, maybe you're evolving past, but, kind of keeps showing up?
There's always that question of, is this message truly being received? I don't think there's any leader in the world that has ever put a message out into the world without having that thought somewhere in their mind. How is everybody going to respond to this? Is this actually going to elicit a response? So to me, my big thought on this whole thing, and it's not necessarily my main objective, but it's something that I look at as a byproduct, is if we start doing all of these different things that I'm talking about, asking deeper questions, the guests doing more to show the content to their audience, everybody's going to grow. The content's going to get better. The podcast platform as a whole is going to continue to get better. And as the content gets better, more people start to filter in. We know the meteoric rise that podcasting has underwent in the last few years, and that's continuing to trend upward. But there's so many flaws within our system. From the production side, podcasters walk away from their content far too soon before they get fixated on download numbers. And if they aren't high enough and they haven't hit some arbitrary standard for, this is, my show is getting listened to and this is how many people I have, they
Will
say,
you talk about that for a second? Actually,
I'd love
you mentioned
to.
that a couple of times. I'm really curious to
yeah,
know
no, I'd love to. I
mean,
mean, that's one of my biggest gripes and complaints about the podcast space, is that download metric. People treat it like it's dipped in gold and it's the number one metric to determine the success of your show. And that could not be further from the truth. Download numbers are a vanity metric. It's a flawed vanity metric, because if you go and subscribe to a podcast right now, whenever that podcaster publishes new content, you'll get it filtered right to your device. That counts as a download for you, but that doesn't necessarily mean I listen to it. So I know, and I can speak from experience. I had a backlog of podcasts that I had subscribed to in my phone, and you only have so many hours in the day, so you can't get to all of them. It became a space issue. So I had to delete a lot of podcasts that I never listened to. Some I went back to, some I didn't.
Yeah.
But as the podcaster, you got credited for a download. Okay, fine. That means no value was experienced on my end. I didn't hear any of the ads from any advertisers that you're partnered with, and I didn't hear the value of your content because I didn't listen. But again, you got your download. But that to me makes it flawed when you say, "Oh, I've got 50,000 downloads on my podcast." Who cares? Who cares? That's phenomenal growth. If anybody's accomplished that, I think it's great, but it's not what you hang your hat on. What you hang your hat on is the value of the content that you put in front of your audience and the consistency in which you do it. That's how you truly grow, because the more valuable content you put in front of your audience, the more they have to grab hold of. And when they do that, if they are truly locked into what you're doing and you're doing it every single week or every single day in some cases, that's going to make one listener turn to a listener that they work with, or a podcast listener that they're friends with, or colleagues, family members, whoever, and say, you have to listen to Kevin's podcast. I'm learning so much from this show, and I can't recommend it enough. Okay, I'll check it out. So that one person recommended it to one other person. You just doubled your audience. If you only had one listener, now you got two. Every time you create recommendable content because it's quality and it's coming at them consistently, you put yourself in a position to grow, because people recommend podcasts all the time. I only say it like this. If you are looking at your download metrics and you see 50 downloads per episode, most podcasters get frustrated. Oh man, that's just not big enough. I only say, well, what's big enough? What's your number? No one has an answer to that. It's arbitrary. No one's,
51.
Right? Yeah, 51 and everything's going to happen.
Yeah.
No, it's nuts, because that's what people look at, but then they don't have a thought of, well, I need to be here. And even if they say, okay, I'd like to have 1,000. Okay, well, what's going to happen when you hit 1,000? I don't have that answer. That's up to you to decide. And they don't know. Typically, they don't. I mean, when you get big, massive growth, you do open up opportunities for sponsorship. You can open up opportunities for advertising, paying you more, because if it's paying on downloads per 1,000, then yeah, you can get more money generated that way. But then you've got a podcast that's peppered with ads. So you have to weigh out how you do that too, because you don't want to have too many ads, because then people are going to say, well, I don't want to listen to this. There's too many ads. It's just like a TV show that runs too many commercials. Right, exactly. So I always say to people, listen, if you got 50 downloads on your last episode and you're frustrated by that, if you had those same 50 people in your living room, would you give them the royal treatment? Would you bring out the good whiskey? Would you show them a good time? Would you provide value to them on every juncture, at every juncture? Or would you look past those 50 out your front door, wondering, where are the other 100,000 people? No. Those 50 people are in your house. You would treat them with the utmost respect. And that's how you have to look at your audience. If that's how many listeners you have right now, that's how many listeners you have right now. Keep putting great content in front of those 50 people. Because again, you keep doing that, those 50 people are going to turn around and recommend it to one person. All 50 of them do that. Now you've got 100. People keep recommending your podcast, and you keep putting that content out with quality and consistency each and every week, or whenever you say you're going to. Stick to your schedule. That's another place where people miss out. Start doing it sporadically. People that have worked a podcast into their life, maybe on Thursday morning at the gym, they listen to Kevin's podcast. All of a sudden, Thursday morning, it's not there. What are they going to do? They're going to find another podcast, or they're going to listen to music, or whatever. But they're going to slowly work you out when you stop being consistent. So produce quality content consistently. Do not get fixated on your download metric. If you're going to look at your download metric, look at how it's building your whole catalog, not just this week's episode. We have a tendency, or podcasters have a tendency, to treat this week's release like the Hope Diamond. This is the greatest thing you'll ever have. This is so phenomenal. And then a couple days later, I'm done with that. Just throw the Hope Diamond over your shoulder and start looking to the next one. Then the next week it's repeat. No, that just because you release new content doesn't make the content that came out before it less valuable. And people are going to find your show at different points. You may be on episode 75, but they may find your show at episode 32 because someone recommended episode 32 to them. And they were so blown away by what they heard. They say, this is phenomenal. I got to start catching up on this. So they either go backwards or they go forwards, but they start listening to all of your other content. So those episodes are still generating listens for you. And that's growing your overall podcast number. So if you look at down the numbers, look at how it's affecting your entire catalog, not just this week, because I guarantee more listeners are going to come and find that episode when the time is right.
Yeah, very cool. I think it's hard not to get tripped up in that, especially in the beginning. Like, oh, I have this, and I love that. You're like, well, what would make you happy? And there's not really an answer there. I'm like, well, if you don't know what you want, then you're never going to get it. Period.
Right.
And so I think that's pretty brilliant advice. All right, man. Well, in an effort to protect your time and bring this thing in for a landing, let's do a little fire round. I got a couple of quick questions, quick answers.
Let's do it.
What's something in your life, Jason, that's non-negotiable?
Non-negotiable is spending time with my daughter. I know that, even in doing that, I've experienced it as she's aging. She's 12 now, and those nights when I would lay and read to her because she was still asking me what I was thinking. She's probably not going to want to do this anymore pretty soon. I want to soak this up for as long as she keeps asking me, and it just happened recently.
Yeah,
she didn't ask Dad to read to her before. She reads herself now before she goes to bed. So those little moments, I knew they were slipping away. So I tried to embrace as much of it as I can, and just know that this is happening now, and it's not going to happen again.
Oh, very cool. What's a favorite book to read, recommend, or give away?
I have two that I recommend to everybody. One is The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson, and the other is The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. Those are two books that changed my thinking, changed my mindset in so many different ways. And when it came to understanding how to get the most productivity from my day, The One Thing just completely opened my eyes and made me realize how wrong I was doing it and how I needed to restructure things to make those non-negotiable appointments for myself. So I would make sure my most important work gets done on a daily basis. Two books that I could not recommend highly enough.
Yeah, both of those are really great. What's one message, if you could share it with everybody in the world, what would that be?
Slow down, I think, is probably something that I still have to tell myself. And if I'm getting ahead with projects or trying to go a number of different ways and think, well, what's going to work here? And it might lead to being a little bit frantic. Just slow down, take a look at everything for what it is, and find the best path. Because you think about it, if you're going too fast, you might miss your exit. You might miss what you're driving at because you were just flying. So I always say, slow down. Everything's going to be, you're going to be no worse off tomorrow if nothing changes today. But if you put your time in the right place, you may create an opportunity for yourself because you're looking at it from a logical, realistic standpoint, and you're doing it methodically. Create an opportunity for tomorrow that you weren't expecting.
Oh, beautiful. What does freedom mean to you?
Freedom is the ability to take time away when it's needed. And I think we've all, on the entrepreneurial level, experienced some semblance of burnout, or it's something that it's on the horizon. And if I keep going down this path, it's going to happen. And what's great about being in the entrepreneurial space is you can, if you manage your time properly, work in these breaks that will allow you to recharge and get you back into that zone of genius. And if you overextend yourself and you just completely obliterate your mental bandwidth, it can be hard to create from that space. But freedom allows you to take some time away, even if it's just a day, where you block out everything. And as I sit here and talk and give this piece of advice, I realize I haven't done this recently, and I think I'm going to need to do it. Just have one of those days where you block out everything and do what you love. You can lay on the couch and watch Netflix all day if that's what you love and that's what you want to do. If that's going to recharge your batteries, do it. If you want to go out on the river and kayak, or go for a bike ride, or just walk around the neighborhood and just get outside and experience some fresh air, whatever it's going to take, recharge your batteries. And having freedom allows you to do that when you feel the need to do it. And if you don't have that freedom, you get locked in to a schedule, you get locked in to a task, and sometimes it can be hard to escape.
Yeah. I mean, you're not going to be effective if your spring is always sprung, right? You got a coil too.
Right.
So I think that's great advice. All right, last question. Where can people go to learn more about you and engage with you?
Head on over to jasoncercone.com/unlockyourfreedom. And I'll have a special gift there for you waiting. And spoiler alert, it's all about how to do better with podcasting. So not to not to unwrap the present before you arrive. But once you land on my website, please feel free to take a look around. If you're thinking about entering into this podcast space but would like some guidance, I have a number of different ways that we can connect and talk about this, and I'd be happy to help you get started on the right foot. Or if you're seasoned and looking for some ways to improve, I'd be happy to have that conversation as well.
Oh, very cool. I would highly recommend taking advantage of that too. Jason's a really cool dude, but also has a lot of brilliance to share. And I know that from what he just said on this show, but also from talking to him before we fired up the mic in the green room. So really big heart and a big brain, man. That beautiful combination that we're always looking for. So, man, thanks for being here. Give us a parting shot and we'll get out of here.
Well, Kevin, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure. I loved having the conversation with you on my podcast, Evolution of Brand. So I invite anybody listening to this conversation to look up Kevin on Evolution of Brand. And if you like what you hear, plenty of other episodes available for you to take in, and would love to have you as a listener. And I can say, with what Kevin's doing here, he's doing a phenomenal job building Unlock Your Freedom and bringing on the best possible guests to have conversations with. So the best way for you to repay is to jump over to Apple Podcasts, leave a quick rating, leave a written review on this podcast, and let them know what you think. That feedback always helps us as podcasters so we can continue to make quality content. So take a quick minute to do that. I know Kevin will appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And do the same for Jason's when you go over there to his. Actually did that on yours this morning. So really right cool, on. You guys. That's great advice. And a little known fact about when you leave a review on Apple is that it makes you better looking and more intelligent as a byproduct. I read that on the internet, so it has to be true, right?
That's right. Abraham Lincoln said that.
Yeah, he did. And then Maya Angelou retweeted it, I think. So beautiful advice, man. Thanks for being here, you guys. We love y'all. Jason, you're the man. Thanks for being here. See y'all next time on the Unlock.
Thanks, Kevin. Podcast. Thanks, everybody.